The summer of 2025 began under a cloud of economic uncertainty. Across Canada, business leaders, workers, and families watched the skies with a sense of unease, aware that the world was shifting in unpredictable ways. The global economy was already fragile, and now, new threats loomed on the horizon, casting long shadows over the country's future. For decades, Canada's prosperity depended on a stable, open border with the United States. The flow of goods, services, and people across the world's longest undefended border had become the backbone of Canadian economic life, supporting millions of jobs and entire communities from coast to coast. But the Trump administration's second term brought a dramatic shift, threatening the free trade consensus that had long defined North America. New tariffs, heated rhetoric, and a willingness to upend established agreements sent shockwaves through boardrooms and government offices alike. Suddenly, the foundation of Canada's economy, its deep reliance on US markets, was at risk. The possibility of border slowdowns, new trade barriers, and retaliatory measures became more than just headlines. They became daily concerns for exporters, manufacturers, and workers. With 75% of Canadian exports heading south, any disruption could have severe consequences for jobs and industries nationwide. From auto plants in Ontario to wheat farms in the prairies, the stakes were enormous. Even a brief interruption in trade could ripple through supply chains, threatening livelihoods and the stability of entire regions. President Trump's protectionist rhetoric and unpredictable policies forced Ottawa to prepare for a scenario once unthinkable: a major trade dispute with its closest ally. Behind closed doors, officials scrambled to develop contingency plans, consult with industry leaders, and reassure a nervous public that Canada would be ready for whatever came next. This story explores how Canada navigated the crisis, the role of the USMCA in shielding the economy, and the strategies that helped the nation weather the storm. It's a tale of diplomacy, resilience, and the difficult choices faced by leaders determined to protect Canadian interests. In the face of uncertainty, Canada's response would test its resilience and redefine its economic future. The coming months would reveal not just the strength of its institutions, but the spirit of its people, united in the hope of weathering the storm and emerging stronger on the other side. On August 1st, 2025, the Trump administration unveiled sweeping tariffs, marking a dramatic shift in North American trade policy. The announcement, made on the White House lawn, was broadcast live and immediately captured the world's attention. The news sent shockwaves through the global economy, rattling financial markets and leaving investors scrambling to assess the fallout. International ports braced for disruption, and traders watched as stock prices tumbled in real time. Canada, America's closest trading partner, was hit hardest, facing a sudden 35% tariff on most goods exported to the US. The move threatened to choke off the flow of products that had long crossed the border freely. Even more severe were the 50% tariffs slapped on Canadian steel and aluminum, industries that had been tightly integrated with US manufacturers for decades. The auto sector, a backbone of Canada's economy, was also targeted with a 25% tariff on auto parts, threatening thousands of jobs and the future of cross-border car manufacturing. These measures threatened to upend the deeply integrated supply chains that North American businesses had spent decades building, putting at risk everything from raw materials to finished products. Overnight, Canadian industries faced the prospect of shuttered factories, mass layoffs, and a wave of uncertainty that rippled through communities from coast to coast. The White House justified the tariffs by citing disputed claims about fentanyl trafficking and Canada's new digital services tax, but many saw these as thinly veiled pretexts for a broader push toward economic nationalism. Canadian officials quickly denounced the move, arguing that the real motivation was to protect US industries at Canada's expense, and warning of severe consequences for both economies. The timing, coming amid intense US political turmoil and a heated election season, only deepened the crisis and fueled speculation about the administration's true intentions. For Canada, the stakes were existential. The very structure of its economy, built on decades of close partnership with the US, was suddenly under assault, leaving business leaders and workers alike in a state of shock. The announcement was more than a policy change. It was an economic declaration of war, sparking protests, emergency meetings, and urgent calls for a response from Ottawa. As businesses braced for impact, Canada faced the very real prospect of a deep recession. with entire sectors at risk of collapse and communities fearing for their future. The country now stood at a crossroads, forced into a painful reassessment of its most important relationship and the path forward in a new, uncertain trade reality. Amid the turmoil and uncertainty sweeping across global markets, Canada's best defense was already quietly in place: its membership in the United States-Mexico-Canada Agreement, or USMCA. While other nations scrambled to react, Canada had already built a legal and economic shield, forged through years of negotiation and strategic foresight. Ratified in 2020, the USMCA was more than just a trade deal. It was a comprehensive framework that provided legal protections, ensuring that most Canadian exports would be exempt from sudden, arbitrary US tariffs. This agreement was the result of tough bargaining and a recognition of how deeply intertwined the North American economies had become. Thanks to strict rules of origin and carefully crafted provisions, nearly all Canadian energy exports and 95% of other goods continued to flow south of the border without new duties. This meant that vital sectors, like oil, natural gas, and manufactured goods, remained protected, even as global trade tensions escalated. The USMCA turned what could have been an economic catastrophe into a manageable challenge. Instead of facing a sudden collapse in exports, Canadian businesses could focus on adapting to targeted issues rather than bracing for a total shutdown. While a small fraction of exports did face new tariffs, the core of Canada's economy, energy, autos, and manufacturing, remained largely insulated. This protection allowed Canadian industries to keep operating, safeguarding thousands of jobs and stabilizing communities across the country. The USMCA fundamentally changed the dynamic between Canada and its trading partners, allowing the country to respond from a position of strength and confidence. Instead of being forced into a defensive crouch, Canada could negotiate and adapt with clarity and purpose. Instead of panic, there was focus. Address the targeted problem, not a total collapse. Canadian leaders and businesses worked together, analyzing the new landscape and finding ways to minimize disruption. The value of careful diplomacy and robust trade agreements had never been clearer. Years of preparation and negotiation paid off, as Canada's economic foundation held firm while others faltered. The USMCA became Canada's economic shield, proving that strategic preparation and international cooperation can blunt even the most aggressive trade threats. It was a testament to the power of foresight and unity. In 2025, this agreement was the difference between disaster and resilience for Canada, ensuring that, even in the face of global upheaval, the nation could stand strong and look to the future with hope. Prime Minister Mark Carney's government chose diplomacy over retaliation. Rather than escalate, Ottawa emphasized the protections of the USMCA and the mutual benefits of cross-border trade. Canada framed the tariffs as misguided, appealing to moderate US voices and business leaders. By shelving a planned digital services tax, Canada removed a key US grievance, strengthening its diplomatic position. This calm, measured approach prevented a trade war, preserved vital relationships, and kept the door open for future dialogue. Canada responded with targeted strategic tariffs, $30 billion on select US goods focused on politically sensitive sectors. Crucially, Ottawa built in exemptions for Canadian manufacturers reliant on US inputs, minimizing harm to its own economy. The result: strong political signaling with little collateral damage. Simultaneously, the government launched an information campaign to help exporters maximize USMCA benefits. By balancing firmness with pragmatism, Canada protected its interests without triggering a wider conflict. The response was sophisticated, measured, and effective. It showed that Canada could stand up for itself without self-inflicted wounds. Despite the USMCA shield, the tariffs sent shockwaves through Canada's economy. Markets tumbled and uncertainty gripped key sectors, especially manufacturing and autos. The 25% auto parts tariff disrupted supply chains, leading to layoffs and investment freezes. The Bank of Canada reported sharp job losses in export-dependent industries. Even with most goods protected, the chilling effect of protectionism was real and painful. Economic forecasts warned of a potential 1–2% GDP hit if the dispute dragged on. The tariffs were more than a diplomatic spat. They were a real threat to Canadian livelihoods. the crisis exposed just how vulnerable Canada was to US policy shifts. The Canadian government and central bank acted fast to stabilize the economy. Interest rates were cut to spur investment and cushion the blow. Targeted support packages helped laid-off workers, especially in the auto sector, with retraining and retooling funds. Ottawa ramped up assistance for exporters, ensuring businesses could navigate USMCA rules and maintain market access. These measures prevented localized pain from becoming a national crisis. The government's multi-pronged response, monetary stimulus, direct aid, and practical support helped steady the economy. While the damage couldn't be erased, decisive action blunted the worst impacts. Canada's commitment to its workers and industries was clear and unwavering. The tariff crisis was a wake-up call. Canada could no longer rely so heavily on the US. Trade diversification became an urgent priority. Canada accelerated efforts to leverage deals with the EU and Asia-Pacific, opening new markets for exporters. Trade missions and support programs encouraged businesses to look beyond the US border. At home, Ottawa pushed to dismantle inter-provincial trade barriers, building a stronger internal market. The goal, a more resilient, globally connected economy, less vulnerable to external shocks. Diversification was no longer optional, it was essential for Canada's future. The events of 2025 set the country on a new, more independent path. The 2025 trade dispute was a defining test of Canada's resilience and strategy. The USMCA proved its worth, shielding the economy from disaster. Calm diplomacy, targeted retaliation, and practical support kept the crisis from spiraling. The lesson was clear: robust agreements and measured responses matter. The experience forced Canada to confront its vulnerabilities and embrace diversification. As the country looks ahead to future challenges, it does so stronger, wiser, and better prepared. The storm of 2025 left Canada changed and ready for whatever comes next.